I apologize, there's two recordings for this chapter. I'm not sure what happened, but the software froze up on me and would not allow me to continue recording. So I'm looking at the lecture notes here, and in particularly I'm looking at C1, also known as Atlas. So if you look at Atlas, it does not have a body nor a spinous processes, transverse or spinous. But it does have two articulation processes, which is represented by B. So the skull sits on top of Atlas. The articular processes, B, and the occipital condyles allow for nodding of the head. So not this, that's flexion, nodding. It's just a slight amount of motion. Okay, if C2 through C7 are getting involved, that's neck flexion. Nodding is just the articulation between the skull and C1. In this image, we are looking at C2, also known as axis. It also does not have a body, but if you can tell, it's starting to resemble other cervical vertebrae like C3 through C7. If we look at A, this is a projection that arises off of the vertebrae itself, and it's called the dens. Other people refer to it as an odontoid process, and what happens is that process actually sticks up through C1 like this. And what this does is allows a slight amount of rotation at the head. So again, if you do this, that's cervical rotation. What I'm talking about here is the rotation between C1 and C2, which is this. It's just a slight amount. So let's take a look at the ligaments here. A represents the anterior longitudinal ligament. B is the body of the vertebrae. H represents the posterior longitudinal ligament. If we look at F, F is the supraspinal ligament. E is the interspinal, so inter, I-N-T-E-R, between. And then G represents the ligamentum flavum. So let me move this screen over so you can take a look at what I'm seeing. Oops, I apologize. Okay. You can find that image that we were just looking at on page 247 in your textbook, and it's figure 15-13. So let's put some definitions to these ligaments. So the anterior longitudinal ligaments is attached to the anterior surface of the vertebral bodies and limits hyperextension. The posterior longitudinal ligament is attached to the posterior surface of the vertebral bodies within the vertebral canal, and it limits excessive flexion. Ligamentum flavum, also in the vertebral canal, spans lamina to lamina. From one vertebrae to the next. It's highly elastic, but prevents hyperflexion. Supraspinal ligament spans from C7 to the sacrum, attached to the outer aspect of the spinous process. again to limit flexion. Now, the above C7 with the interspinal ligament, it's continuous. But once it's above C7, it becomes the nuchal ligament. And if you think back to some of the shoulder complex muscles that we studied, there's attachments of those muscles into that ligament. So, muscles, well, core, postural, reflect back upon what we did in lab. It's a good place to kind of study up on some of these. And if you look at the muscles I have listed here, you need to know the origin, insertion, action, and nerve for the sternocleidomastoid only. That's the one with the asterisks here. These others, just give them a quick read. I don't even know that I would commit them to memory. Just read them so that if you hear the name in the future, you'll be like, oh yeah, I remember studying that at one point. Your abs, you need to know the OAIN for rectus abdominis, internal and external obliques. For quadratus lumborum, you need to know the actions. Okay. Review this video, review the images, make sure you're doing your reading, and see everyone soon.